Hello,
Okay.
everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Albina Rippey. Welcome, welcome. And it is my honor and my privilege to introduce to you my dear beloved teacher and mentor, Robert Boustany. I did my very first yoga teacher training with Robert back in 2007, and my life has never been the same, you guys. And Raja, my husband, often jokes, remembering that year when I did your training, Robert, every single day I'd come home and just rave, well, Robert says this, Robert says that. So to this day, he kind of like laughs about that. Robert is a physicist. He is a teacher of teachers. He's been teaching yoga for over 50 years. And I'm willing to bet you guys that most of you don't even realize what a treat it is to be able to study and learn from Robert Boustany. So Robert, it is my pleasure, my privilege, my honor to be a student yet again in your course. Thank you so much. And you are on now.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's very, very sweet and kind and ah, humbling too. Why do I teach? And that's maybe the first thing that you should hear. The reason I teach is because I had beloved teachers who were incredible. And they told me, it's your turn. It's time for you to go and teach. And I said, no, no, no. I'll send everyone to you. I had two of them, both realized beings. And they both took samadhi within 2 years. And I had no choice. And I realized as I was out there teaching that the only way I could say thank you for everything they gave me was to teach. The only way I could say thank you was to teach. Now, I taught a variety of different styles of yoga. I've done lots of things with Chinese medicine, um, Chinese internal arts, Taoism, Tibetan Buddhism, including some of the highest initiations. So I've explored things quite a bit. And so they're usually a basis. When you have this many different experiences, holdings of knowledge that don't quite intersect, at a certain point, you have to find where do they all intersect? Because Taoism can be very different than Chinese internal arts or Tibetan Buddhism, obviously. And yoga can be very different from that as well. And there are lots of different styles of yoga. So what you're going to get tonight and in the next 2 days is a compilation, intersection of lots of different things that I've studied and discovered. I've been practicing yoga for 60 years now, a little over 60 years. I started when I was 11. And so I'm 72 now. And why do I teach the way I teach? I teach the way I teach because I've looked all my life for what is the origin of all these different systems of knowledge. And part of what happened in the process of exploring is you met a number of great masters and they would say, you remember this from a previous lifetime. You need to know this knowledge. And maybe you didn't remember, and it will make things easier. And so I started picking up all these different disparate secrets, if you will. And then over a lifetime, they integrated into a cohesive whole that makes sense. And so I'm going to give it to you that way, where we start off. And what are you going to do? What are you going to do with the physical body? Because I'm not trying to give you a workout per se. I spend most of my time in meditation. Why did I do that? And it'll make more sense when I go through the energetics. You strip away all the emotional imprints of a lifetime. Everything from sadness to great joy, all the different losses, all the different challenges. And when you strip it out of the fascial trains, then the acupuncture meridians come alive in a way they would not otherwise. And it takes a lifetime to do some of that. And then at a certain point, you find that if I'm in a given position, and as I rotate an arm out, rotate a leg out, reach through the length of a leg, and then hold it there, as I do all of those things, why do I do it that way? Because it increases the energy. So the alignment is not just about, and I'll discuss alignment. This will become very thick with information. It's not just a question of alignment. It's a question of how do you run the energy? How, when you hold a given pose, do you increase the energy? And so, just to emphasize it as such, if I'm sitting here and I place my hands down, how do I place my hands so the wrist is in the best possible position? How do I place my hands so the energy running through my arm is greatest? How do I align my back so my legs can express the greatest strength? So if I set myself into that kind of position, it takes some energy to do that. And usually people in my age can't do that. But why can I do that? And that's the secret I want to leave with you. Why do I want to leave the secret with you? Because you will keep yoga alive. Your privilege is to carry the knowledge of yoga in the purest form I can give it to you, with all the secrets intact. And it's not for me to judge you, but that you hold your hands out with a willingness to carry that and a willingness to serve from your heart. If someone is very ill, and maybe you're not on the best terms with them, and maybe you're tired, and they say, would you rub my back? My back hurts. And if you have compassion in your heart, you might do that, even though you're tired, even though they're maybe not your favorite person. And what will you find? Because whenever you touch someone, whenever you teach someone, you feel them and they feel you. There's a tuning between the teacher and the student. And if there's a close connection, then the energy can flow very freely. Even without speaking words, the knowledge will flow from one to the other because of that openness. And so if you begin to touch someone that's in pain, what do you notice? That as they feel better, you can feel them feeling better, and you feel better. So service is not just for other people, it's for you too. To be able to teach is a privilege. People would say, How do you feel about your students? I love my students. You know why I love my students? I'll tell you very specifically why I love my students. Because they share their pain with me. And they share their insights with me. And because they share all the difficulties they have gone through, I have learned from that. You are my teachers. Take that attitude. You have the honor to carry the knowledge of yoga. Appreciate the people who come and share their pain with you so you don't have to go through it. And you can learn. So what makes you a great teacher? Your students shared their pain with you. And you were willing to learn from that. You're willing to experience it and learn from it. And what happens if I clear certain types of pain inside of myself? Then when someone comes up with a given type of pain, I can tell what's going on. Why? Because I'm open, resonates inside of me. There is compassion, not sympathy, compassion for what they're going through. You understand what they're suffering. And you can say something in a very intelligent way to help them get through that pain. What else can you do? If I'm in profound meditation and I meet someone like that that has tremendous amount of grief, what ends up happening? This is a reality. This is not just chat. This is a reality. If someone has grief, I can feel their grief. And then what happens? Some of the energy from my meditation goes into them, and I pick up some of the grief, but I can burn it out very fast, faster than they can. So they come around and they feel better. And what does it do for me? It makes me stronger. That's what it does. But then I'm getting into the energetics. You're a biological system, but you're a biological battery. So why do I want to clear my physical system, my fascia, of all the heaviness that might be in it? Because once I do, then I can just sit and breathe. And the stresses on the fascia will generate microcurrents that feed into my biological battery. And now, even if I have severe protein deficiency, I'm still stronger than the average person at any age. How did that happen? Because I understand how to align. Because I'm willing to relax in the midst of adversity. I don't run away from it. Why would I? And I would tell you this at the outset. You have to have standards that you won't go against regardless of what happens with someone else. Regardless, whether they understand you or misunderstand you, you have to have standards that never change, no matter what. And what happens? I'll tell you a little tiny story. There'll be lots of stories. I like to teach with stories. There's this big, giant customs officer, very muscular, huge guy. And I was coming from Europe doing a teacher training. And he was fingerprinting these people. And he was not very happy. Little family with a little baby. He was not in a good mood. And I was the next one up. And so I walked up, and what am I doing? Below the clouds of your heart is the most beautiful energy you can imagine. And it's always there. And the door never closes. And I was feeling that place inside of myself because my teachers taught me how to move energy inside of myself so that when you're in a crowd, you can clear yourself of whatever is there and stay in a beautiful place. And I walked up to him. He's sitting behind this desk. And he sees me come up, and I just stand there. I'm just there. And he looks at me, and his head goes, I wish I could be that relaxed. Welcome home. My state improved his state. And we need this in the world. So I have some very specific alignment that I'm going to talk about tonight. And then the next couple of sessions, we'll do more with energetics. But this is very specific. And there are insights which will help you to open up. Gratefully, I have 3 hours. So what's the first thing I do? I'm sure Albina's seen this before. If I have one block on top of another and I say, this is a joint, it's a virtual joint. I have uniform pressure over that joint. That means if I'm walking around with this kind of joint, the cartilage will last for a long time. But if I have a joint where it's very tight on one side and very loose on the other side, let's say this is a hamstring. Thigh bone, lower leg bone. You say, my hamstrings are really tight. So the back of my knee joint is tight. And the front of my knee joint is not so tight. So very easy for me to bend my knee. Maybe a problem, maybe not. So what would traditionally be suggested? That you stretch the tight side to open the joint. But in any joint, there are two problems, at least two. Compression on the tight side of the joint and weakness on the very open side of the joint. So where's the cartilage going to wear out? Here. And where am I going to get sprains and soft tissue injury? Here. So instead of trying to stretch the hamstring, okay, you're going to have to get used to me because I will digress because I want to make a point. If I'm sitting and I take one leg up, how long do I have to pull on my right leg? That's my right leg. How long do I have to pull on my right leg until my quadriceps get strong? How long? Eternity? If I just stretch my hamstring, how long is it going to take for my quadricep to get strong? Pick your leg up. You're at home alone. Nobody will give you a hard time. Pick your leg up. So if I'm in this particular position now, and I let go, what's going to hold the leg up? No, turn your head and your chest and your pelvis away from that lifted leg. Keep the leg up. And you can look dramatic. Put your arm across your forehead. Look like you're suffering. Oh my God. It's a muscle contraction. How horrible. Like there aren't muscle contractions in yoga, right? So I flex my foot and I reach through the length of my leg and I turn my pelvis away from the lifted leg and I let go and I feel the quadricep. and I grab the foot. Now, how long do I have to pull on my hamstring before the quadricep gets strong? All eternity. Maybe not that long, but long, right? So if I don't strengthen my quadricep, the hamstring cannot release. The back of the leg will not release. What happens if the spine gets longer? What happens when you have a pinched nerve? When you have a pinched nerve, you get weakness, numbness, atrophy in the muscles downstream. So if I have compression in my lower back, I could have a weak quadricep. Then my leg will not open so well. Do you understand? So if I want to increase the energy in that lifted leg, what do I have to do? I have to lengthen the spine. So grab the foot, pull it up. Do it. I can see you. You can have your knee bent too, that's okay. So if I'm in this position and put my hands down and lengthen my abdomen, can you feel the quadricep tighten? When I lengthen my spine, the quadricep tightens more strongly. So by decompressing my spine, I can increase the strength of the quadricep, which we knew, right? You knew that. Now what happens if I'm in that position and I lift the foot? I'm going to give you a very short course in forward bending. So I have this foot up. What happens if I flex the foot? It does something to the back of the leg. Here I've got two legs, right? And I'm holding on with my fingers. My legs are relaxed. See where my legs are? Pay attention. See where my legs are? When I flex my feet, the legs drop. Why did the legs drop? Because as soon as I turn on the muscles in the front of my legs, the back of the legs let go. Got that? So if I'm here and I just let the legs hang, that's where they are. But if I flex the feet and turn on the quadriceps, they go down. So what's lengthening? This is lengthening. So when you're doing a standing pose, what does it mean? It means you have to turn on the quadricep and you have to turn on the lower leg. You're not just standing. Standing poses are not just standing. You can be in a line with a mask on, severe lack of oxygen. Your yoga pose will not improve. Right? Not going to. Let's take it a different way. This will all knit together. I always teach in a nonlinear way. Why do I teach in a nonlinear way? Because if I give you a bunch of different clear insights, they eventually link up together, and then your memory of them will hold better. This is always done in Himalayas. It's always nonlinear teaching. So I have all these digressions, and people are like, you're driving me crazy. Just give me a list. I'll memorize the list. No, list isn't going to do you any good. I'll give you a list. Brain, eyes, heart. Which one is your favorite? Doesn't make sense to put things in lists because each has its own unique properties. They're unique values. So I don't want you to have a list. I want you to understand the relationship between the different elements. That each has their purpose in a very powerful way. That's what you want. That's what you need to know. And it's a little difficult in the beginning because you feel like a little confused, but then what happens? Once you study with someone that way for a while, you start finding, that I'll give you the typical statement that I make. Someone comes into teacher training, and they study for a couple of months. And then one day they come in and they don't think they know anything. And they said, the strangest thing happened. I was with some friends over the weekend, and they were having a back problem. And I talked for an hour and a half. I had no idea I knew all that. Because you don't know what you know. And you don't know how it integrates. And sometimes it only integrates once you get an opportunity to apply it, which is why you have classes. So, what did I say? If the leg comes up and I flex the foot, the back of the leg will let go. What if I reach my knee toward the ceiling? Oh, the leg comes back even more. Look, watch this. I'm pulling on the foot. Arm is pulling pretty strongly. But when I flex the foot, I can get it to come back a tiny bit. And if I reach my heel toward the ceiling or knee, it comes back more. Why? Because when the quadricep turns on, then I don't need the arm. So unless I turn on the quadricep, I can't release the back of the leg. That's why pulling on the leg is not going to open the back of the leg. You have to turn on the quadricep. Now, what did I say? If you lengthen the spine, then the strength of the quadricep will go up. Let's look at that a different way. Let's pretend the arm is a quadricep. Just take your hand, put your arm in front of your chest, maybe 45 degrees out, okay? 45 degrees out to the side. You know, like you're a traffic cop or something. And you flex the hand back and you push through the length of the arm. Now, notice what your arm feels like. Turn your head away from that arm. And as you're pushing through, you feel more contractions, yes? You feel a little more intensity in the arm, don't you? So as soon as I have released the fascial line from my neck into my arm, the arm could express greater strength. Now, watch. Keep your head turned, reach through the arm. It should hurt a little bit. Intensity, some intensity, okay? Now, touch your shoulder to your ear and try to make those contractions. And they go away. Why? I compressed the neck. I compressed the nerve supply going into the arm. I compressed the energetic flow into the arm. But if I'm like this and I'm pushing or even contracting my fist, okay, you know, yogi power or something, right? Somebody put on their sign on a restaurant, it's like, you know, that they were open for business and you could sit down and eat. And then they said, due to the pandemic, please riot at home. Now, if you don't have a sense of humor about that, that's okay. I don't mind. I'm crazy this way. But maybe I'll give you some tolerance. So if I have my shoulder on my ear and then I reach through, flex the hand, turn the head away, you feel all these muscle contractions turn on. So what are you doing? If I release my spine, then the muscle stretch, the muscle strength downstream will go up. Let's make that more real. What if I put one hand at my lower abdomen, one hand at my rib cage? See where my hands are? Watch my hands for a moment. I'm going to press my knees apart. When I press my knees apart, I can lengthen the front of the body. What is happening? When I turn on glute medius, if you want to put that down, when you turn on glute medius to press the knees apart, psoas lets go, iliopsoas lets go. So if I want to lengthen iliopsoas, I have to turn on the lateral hips and thighs. That becomes necessary. Okay? How could I lengthen my spine? If I want to lengthen my spine, what is required? You have to have very strong arms and very strong legs in specific ways. for the spine to let go. Spine will not let go unless you have very strong arms and very strong legs. And you say, hey, but if I have very strong arms and very strong legs, doesn't it mean my spine is not compressed? Right. So it makes sense whichever way you want to think about it, doesn't it? If I decompress my spine, then my arms and legs will get stronger. And didn't we just prove it? You can take the other arm, just so you don't feel like it's neglected. You flex the hand, you reach through the length of the arm. You turn the head away from that lifted arm. You let the shoulder blades sink down and the shoulder reach forward, lift the chest, and see if you can increase the contractions. So how do you use your arm? You use your arm in such a way that the strength of the contractions in that arm will increase. How about that? So then if I have an arm in down dog, let's just say down dog. Let's do down dog. If I have my arms in down dog, what happens if I move my shoulders toward the floor? That's serratus anterior. What happens if I reach my hips away from my hands? Oh my goodness. Body starts coming down. And that's only 2 actions, just 2. What happens if I do mula bandha? You won't believe that, but here you go. If I'm here, I'm doing nothing. I'm just bracing through my bones. Now watch, I'm going to do mula bandha. That's mula bandha. No mula bandha, mula bandha. So as soon as I engage the right muscles, but I have an open energetic system, so it shows. It may not show so much for you, but I can train you to get there. Why would I train you to get there? Because if I don't make it and become enlightened this time, and you have some guy with a weird sense of humor and big scary eyes, give him a free class. So I'm preparing for my future. That was a joke, okay, in case you didn't get it. I'll point out the jokes. Some jokes are very obvious. Let me give you one joke that'll be very obvious. Well, maybe it won't be obvious, but you might enjoy it. Why does a chicken coop have 2 doors? Because if it had 4 doors, it'd be a chicken sedan. Okay, that's it. I'll respect you much more after this, okay? I just thought I would throw some, you got to relax, right? Yoga's about relaxing. Okay. Now, what happens if I know lengthening my spine is going to increase the strength in my legs? Then if I want to increase the strength in my legs, I need to lengthen the spine. So in this position, I'm using this position for a little longer. If I press my knees apart, what happens? If you know where glute medius is up here, right? Upper outer hip. If I press my knees apart, psoas releases. So if I want to lengthen the front of my body, I press my knees apart. I have to become stronger in the outer hip and thigh. Now, if my outer hip and thigh become very strong, then when I'm sitting in Siddhasana and I press the thighs apart, I can lengthen. And then once the energy is running and I relax my hands, relax my legs, body stays. The energy will hold you. So the way you do poses is you activate the alignment to release the energy, and then the energy takes over. And in the beginning, it's all physical. You just need to develop some raw strength and awareness. So don't worry about all these details. I'm giving you these details because otherwise it'll take you a long time to figure it out, and some people won't figure it out. So I'm passing it on to you so that you can keep that and let other people know, because this will be lost otherwise. It'll be lost. So if I'm in this particular position, knees press apart, feet press apart. What happens when the feet press apart? I get an internal rotation of the thigh. What does glute medius do? It helps press the knees apart and it rotates the thighs in. So if I'm in this kind of position and I press my knees apart and press my feet apart, then I'm activating glute medius. And then psoas will tend to let go. Now I'm pulling with my arms, trying to lift my chest. But what happens if I push my upper thigh forward? You're going to have to think about these things. You can take some notes. If I take my upper thigh and I have a line of force perpendicular to the upper thigh. So as I'm here, maybe you can see it. As I'm here, I press, knees come in and I press the upper thighs forward. And you feel the quadriceps turn on. And what it does is it releases the back of the leg. Now, I'm not going to go through this a whole lot more. What happens if I want to lift up? Take a leg up. Okay, what did I do? Flex the foot, reach to the length of the leg. That turns on the quadricep. Turn the pelvis away from the lifted leg and take the hand away. What happens if I put my hands down and lift my hips up? Now the weight of my pelvis is decompressing my lower spine. And it ultimately will show up in the neck and the arms will have greater strength as a result of doing that. It's an acquired skill. Is it worth doing? Absolutely. It's worth doing. Because energetically, it's going to develop you in a way that you would not develop otherwise. Okay? So you say, if I can't lift up, what would I do? I think Albina will give you access one way or another to the recording. However that works. So if I'm in this particular position and I'm pressing my feet apart, suppose you don't have long arms. Why do I have long arms? My arms are very long. Were they always this long? No. How did they get long? I released upper trapezius. I released pectorals. I released lats. I released middle trapezius. And so the arms got longer over a lifetime. So if I have long arms, then I want to lift up. Make sure you see what I'm doing here. What happens when you lift up? What makes the abdomen stronger? Shortening the abdomen or lengthening the abdomen? If I pick the same weight up with the abdomen longer, isn't that going to help increase the strength in the abdomen? Let's do it like this. If I put my hands, like that, make it real easy for you to see. If I push my hands down on my thighs, and I'll let my shoulders come up. Why are the shoulders going up? The shoulders are going up because I want the lats to lengthen. Where does the latissimus dorsi run from? Runs from the shoulder all the way down to the top of the pelvis. So that line of muscle, if I pull my shoulders down, then I can't lengthen my waist. So what typically happens, you may not hear that otherwise, if I push down with my arms and I allow the shoulders to come up, I can lengthen my abdomen. What happens if I twist? As I twist and exhale, abdomen draws in. What happens if I press my knees apart? I haven't done that yet. See where I am? And I press the knees apart. When I press the knees apart, I twist a little farther. So what are the three actions that you would use in twisting? I'll give you a simple way to do this. I'm trying to keep everything integrated where you can have a link from one bit of knowledge to another. And eventually it'll make sense. You may have to go through the recording a few times, but it will make sense to you why I'm doing it that way. So if I have a block, what would be a usual problem pushing down with the hand? That I compress the wrist. So if I turn my hand out and I have the thumb pad, the knuckle of the index and middle finger pushing down, then what happens? The carpal tunnel will not collapse. So if I'm pushing down with my hand sort of like that, and I can do the same thing with the other hand as I push down, what happens? Shoulders float up, spine lengthens. I twist. I exhale, draw belly in toward the spine. I press the knees apart. I get very strong contraction in the abdomen. And I inhale and return to a neutral position. Why do I return to a neutral position? This will be a big insight for you. Why do I return to a neutral position? Because if I hold the position without very deep breathing, if I don't cycle in and out, then the muscle begins to tighten in that position, and the fascia will not release. Fascia, we're getting very close to giving you a definition for fascia. As I twist, what am I doing? Knees press apart. What is that? Outer hip and thigh active. That's why the knees push apart. What happens when the knees push apart? Glute medius turns on, lateral outer thigh turns on, and psoas lets go. The muscles that run from the lower rib cage to the lower spine or to the front of the thigh let go. And so if I'm doing a back bend, what becomes necessary to release the front of the spine? I have to turn on the legs in very specific ways, and then the spine will let go. So if I don't cultivate to strengthen the legs in specific ways, I can't get the spine to release. So I exhale, twist, and I inhale and come back to center. And I'm cycling in and out. Now, why did I cycle in and out? What happened when my legs were wide apart? I'll explain to you. I have a line of fascia running from one leg, connecting into the other leg in some way. When I flex the feet and I flex the quadriceps, the knees drop. Why? Because I relax the back of the leg. So if I have a connective tissue, let's talk about it this way. If you have a skeleton, what holds the bones together? And the answer is different than perhaps what you've been taught. What holds the bones together, you can look at the work of Tom Myers. I put some information down where you can see some of what he does. The bones are held together by elastic bands made of what might be termed fascia. At least that's the term that's being largely used. And in that long band of fascia, holding the bones together, maybe from one hand to another, or one leg to another, there are muscles in the band. And if I tighten any muscle in the band on one end or the other end or in the middle, the whole band tightens. Do you understand that? Think about that for a second. I have a band of tissue, it has very minor elasticity, and there are muscles tied in. They're in the band. And if I tighten one muscle, the whole band tightens. Does that make sense to you? And we can talk about it if you're not sure what I'm saying. Now, here's an example. We had David Williams, one of the first people to do Ashtanga yoga, was in my studio. He was teaching, couple of years ago. And there was a young man in the class. And after the class, he had a question. He said, the calf on my left leg, no, the calf on my right leg is tight. It's very tight, so I can't flex my foot very well. So what happens if the feet are on the floor? How do I get off of the floor? The knees go apart a little bit. The knees go back a little bit, which allows my rib cage to come forward. And then what do? I turn on the muscles in the front of the lower leg, and that lifts my hips. I think I need some light here. Okay, so if I'm trying to lift myself up off of the floor, how do I lift myself up off of the floor? The muscles in the front of the lower leg pick me up. And it's not so obvious, but the upper quadricep helps. So how does the upper quadricep help? If I wanted to get up, what do people usually do? They just reach their arms forward, they round their back, and then they try and lift up the hips, kind of roll out of it. But what do you really want to do? You want to keep the curve in your lower spine. So if I'm here, what do? I pull my knees back. So you say, is the chest going forward or are the knees going back? Well, it's relativity. How does the chest go forward? The quadriceps pull the pelvis forward. That's how the chest goes forward. And then when I lift off of the floor, you can watch my toes. What happens? The toes sort of lift away from the floor. So feet are down. And then when I get ready to get up, the toes lift. Why? Because these muscles are what are picking you up. So if you want a leg to be in this kind of position, for whatever reason, you might feel like it'll work out my relationships better. So if the heel is going up, how does the heel go up? Peroneus anterior tibials become strong enough that the heel can go up. That's why. That's why it happens. So if I don't have strength, if I overdevelop the calf by pointing the toes all the time, which incidentally is not practical. I mean, if you're ballet, of course. But in general, what do you need? You need greater strength on the outside of the lower leg, outer ankle, outer lower leg. This has to be strong. If it's not strong, guess what happens? Let's say it's weak. Let's say somebody's wanting to do lotus position and they do this, where they just put their toes on one quadricep and they're getting a stretch on the outer ankle. And let's say it's even worse. Let's say their inner thigh is really strong, so the knee is up. So they're trying to get in this position and you're overstretching the outer ankle. Guess what happens? Well, you could sprain the outer ankle. That's one thing, but that's not the only thing. What did our model tell us? If I compress on one side or overstretch on one side, if I overstretch on one side, I'll get compression somewhere else. So if I overstretch the outer ankle, guess where I get compression? The inside of the knee. You ever sit down for a long period of time and the knees start to hurt? You know why? Because you're doing this. Do you understand what I said? When you stretch the outside of the lower leg, when this is weak, when you don't have the strength to lift your hips up off of the floor, you don't have enough strength here, then you're likely, not absolute, but you're likely to start getting pain on the inside of the knee. That will occur. And that's for me seeing like 80, 90,000 people over the last 60 years, 50 of teaching. More than 50. So what's the most dangerous thing as far as sitting is concerned? To lose the curve on the outside of the ankle. What else? If I get the calves so strong by trying to point my toes all the time, functionally, this is not helpful. I don't mind you pointing toes. I work with ballerinas. And I don't mind you pointing your toes. But you have to develop the strength to flex the foot. So if I pull on my foot, I'm pulling really hard, pulling on the foot. And then, but the foot's not moving. But if I flex the foot, if I turn on these muscles, the foot comes back a little bit, right? So I can pull really hard, get more fingers, pull really hard. The foot is not coming back. But if I flex this muscle, then the foot comes back. And what else happened? The leg dropped because this let go. So it becomes very important to strengthen the outside of the leg. So in lotus is not this kind of thing where the toes are just up on the inner thighs. Lotus is the feet are wrapping around the thighs. Okay, back to David Williams. So David Williams was teaching in my studio, and there was a young man whose right calf was very tight. Now, we just looked at the calf, didn't we? And what did I do when he told me his calf was tight? I strengthened the muscles on the outside of the lower leg. I took the fascia on the back of his, I took the skin on the back of his calf and I moved it back and forth. And so what happens? Skin is very elastic, right? So I can grab skin and pull it, and it all pops back in place if you have enough collagen. You have healthy diet. Now, from the underside of the skin to the bone, fascia is a matrix. It's sort of an elastic matrix. So if I grabbed the back of the calf and I moved it back and forth and loosened it here, and then strengthened the front of the lower leg, then his tight calf would let go. And guess what? It did let go, but not as much as I expected. And you know what happened next? I'm going to show you. So his heel was coming down. And as he's in this position, the heel wouldn't come down anymore. And I looked at his shoulder and I noticed his shoulder needed to rotate out. I'm not faking this. When I rotate the shoulder out, the heel goes down. The fascial line from his arm over his shoulder, down his back, into the calf was tight where? In the shoulder. And it turned out, bike or something like this, he fell, he injured his shoulder, the shoulder was rotated in. And when you rotate the shoulder in, it affects how much the body can open. Now watch this. I'm going to rotate my shoulders in and do down dog. Watch what happens when I do that. I'm in down dog. I rotate the shoulders in and I try to go down, and I cannot go down. But if I rotate the shoulders out, then the body comes down. So what becomes the necessary action for the arm? The arm is, as it turns out, in down dog, the arms are forward of the chest, right? There's the plane of your rib cage, and then the arms are in front. So that's down dog. Shoulder blades down, shoulder blades forward, chest lifted, and then the arm will open. So if I want to lift my arm up, if I squeeze my shoulder into my neck, then the arm can go up, but I'll use my neck to lift the arm. If I let my shoulder blade go down my back, and I take the bottom of the shoulder blade and move it forward, now this is all relaxed. So how am I holding the arm up? I'm holding the arm up with muscles that run from my shoulder blade to my rib cage, serratus anterior, and with the deltoids. So by moving my shoulder blade down, moving my shoulder blade forward, and then turning on deltoids, I lift the arm overhead. And when I do that, look, I've got all this nice space between my neck and shoulder. So when I go into down dog, this is a little slippery carpet here, but it'll give you the idea. If I place my hands down and I'm squeezing my shoulders in or rotating shoulders in, that's how far I can go. But as soon as I rotate the shoulders out, shoulders open up. So do this if you have a block or something you can hold on to. If I hold on to a block and I reach my elbows forward, how do I hold the block? I will have to squeeze with my arms, right? And if I squeeze my shoulder blades together, I drop the block. So if I'm in a position like down dog, so anaphorus has something called turbo dog, right? Where you do elbows bent. But let me show you what's usually done, or what can be often done, how it's misunderstood, and then how you follow the intent of turbo dog. So turbo dog is I have a block between my arms. If I don't have a block between my arms and I put my hands down and I bend my elbows, this is not turbo dog, even though the elbows are bent. Why not? Because watch what happens. If I keep my chest where it is and I reach my elbows toward the floor, look at the difference between where the elbows started and where they end. In other words, if my elbows are not reaching toward the floor while the chest is lifting away from the floor, it's not turbo dog. You're just bending your elbows. You're not turning on serratus anterior. And the intent of turbo dog is to turn on serratus anterior. Why do you want to turn on serratus anterior? You turn on serratus anterior because if you're going to do, let me show off a little bit. If you're going to do a vinyasa where I'm jumping back, what do you have to do? I place my hands, lift up, and as I'm taking my feet back, I float the feet. How did I float the feet? I floated my feet because the muscles that pull the shoulder blade toward the front of the rib cage turned on, not just pectorals. So what's Chaturanga Dandasana? This will all get integrated. I know I'm jumping around a lot, but it'll become integrated. You'll understand. What do I do when I do Chaturanga Dandasana? I'm here. Where's the elbow? The elbow is over the wrist. If I put my hands under my shoulders, that's not Chaturanga Dandasana. Why not? Because it's not turning on serratus anterior. If I do turbo dog, it's not turning on serratus anterior unless the elbows reach toward the floor while the chest lifts. So what do I suggest? Take a block, put it between your upper arms, and as you're in that position, reach the elbows toward the floor, but lift the chest up. And what's it going to do? Well, I know if my elbows go out to the side, I'll drop the block. And unless the elbows are held in, upper trapezius, not upper trapezius, upper triceps, unless the upper tricep is held in, I'm not going to turn on serratus. It won't turn on. What does serratus relate to? Serratus relates to lungs. Serratus anterior is very strongly associated with lungs in applied kinesiology. So you can look at the book Touch for Health I don't know if I put it in the notes, but I'm going to do some things now. Uh, no, I don't have my shirt about. Ask me about my serratives. That's cute. There is a book called Touch for Health. It's John Thie, and it's applied kinesiology. So in applied kinesiology, I was one of the original guinea pigs for people at Texas Chiropractic College when they were exploring applied kinesiology. And the idea of applied kinesiology is they found that if you have a weak muscle, the muscle can be weak for a variety of reasons. It could be an emotional problem. It could be a nutritional problem. It could have to do with blood flow or certain acupuncture points which are not active. It can have to do with an organ problem. So let me give you the example I usually use. There was a young chiropractic assistant who was in my class, and she came to a class, everything looked good, and then a couple of days later she came back, and I noticed she couldn't stabilize her latissimus dorsi in certain poses. The shoulders were not stabilizing, and I knew she had a very healthy diet. She was overall very healthy. And so the conclusion I came to was she had to have an excessive amount of vitamin A, because latissimus dorsi is strongly associated with vitamin A. So I went to her after class, and she was working for a chiropractor. And I said, have you been ODing on vitamin A? And she said, yeah, there's this liquid vitamin A that my chiropractor had, and I think I took too much of it today. And you could see it in her poses. So apply kinesiology will show you a relationship between a given acupuncture meridian, organ, a certain muscle, certain nutrients, so forth and so on. So in particular, for latissimus dorsi, you have to have an adequate amount of vitamin A. If you get too much, it could blow you out. Now, there are other things that are like that. So for example, for hamstrings are strongly associated with large intestines. And if you don't have enough water, because large intestines are very sensitive to the amount of water that you take in, then you might have tight hamstrings because you're not getting enough water. That could be a reason. So anyhow, there's these textbooks on all the different muscles and the associated organs, meridians, nutrients, emotions, and so on. So that might be an interesting reference. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the next 2 lectures so that you get a good perspective on all these things. Why do you use chaturanga? Why do you want to do chaturanga not with the hand underneath the shoulder, but the hand underneath the elbow? Why do you want to do that? Because when serratus becomes strong enough in the advanced stages of yoga, it will help you control your breath so that you're more likely to be able to raise Kundalini. How about that? Now, the only reason I know that is because I've been through the process. Is that generally known? No, it's not. There's all kinds of crazy ideas. We'll do Kapalabhati, it'll raise Kundalini. Well, maybe not. It's very specific. It's like, where did I find this stuff? the yogis in the Himalayas. They said, we've never trained anybody in the West to be a yogi, to survive the way we survive in Himalayas. And they said, would you be interested? And I said, yes, I would be very interested. So gratefully, they're my teachers for the last 8 or 9 years. And it makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference. And so what I'm passing down to you is the origins of yoga. Now, what did I say? Earlier, I said, when you're in a given yoga pose, you cycle in and out. And the reason you cycle in and out is so the muscle relaxes so the fascia can release. So if I have a long band of fascia with muscles in between, I can stretch the fascia. It's okay to do that. But the only way I can stretch the fascia is to relax the muscle. How did I relax the muscles in the back of my legs? I just flexed my feet, right? So as the muscles on the front of the leg turned on, the muscles in the back let go, and then the fascia could start to stretch. And what could I do in this position? Well, I could rotate the arms out, legs out, pull back with my arms, pull back with my legs in this particular position. And eventually, if I hold it long enough, muscles will start getting tired, which is how it's done in hot yoga. You fatigue the muscle so that the fascia can release. Nothing wrong with it. It's just there's no hot yoga in the Himalayas. It's just freezing, right? It's like my guru says, he's wearing like maybe 2 layers of clothing like I have, 2 layers of cotton. And he says, I'm good to -20 dressed like this. If it gets cold, I need a blanket. Very tough people. They go a month or more without food. And they meditate all the time. That's how you survive. But look at this. So I want you to understand what it means to release fascia, to relax muscle, to release fascia. If I'm in this position and I fall toward the floor, my muscles catch me. But if I put my hands down and I relax again and I fall a second time, it takes about as long to catch me. So when I'm going into a given pose, if I can relax the muscle, then I can stretch the fascia. And if I can't, and the muscle comes online, now what happens? Now I have to relax the muscle again. So that means I have to cycle in and out. So what's the rule of thumb in Himalayas, which is the origins of yoga? The movement in yoga follows the breath. Now, if I'm in some given pose and I'm twisting and releasing in that given pose, as I'm relaxed in that given pose, what would I do? Well, I might exhale, twist. If you're a little more experienced, have no blood pressure problems, you might inhale and twist. And in doing that, what happens? Let's say, get in the right place so you can see this. Let's say I have 3 fingers. Middle finger is longest, little finger is shortest. And let's say these are lines of fascia. Now, lines of fascia are very tiny. So if I have these 3 fingers linking together, what is the scale of the 3 fingers you're seeing? If that's actual fascial lines, about 1/4 the thickness of a piece of paper. Very, very tiny scale. Now get this, this is the cool part. If I have those three fingers touching, what happens if I twist the fascia? The tightest area lets go first. So I can do a tiny, tiny movement. I'm catching a foot, rotate the arm out and release, rotate the leg out and release. And what happens? I will slowly begin to loosen the tightest areas of fascia without tearing. It won't tear. It's very, very richly hydrated. So there's always cyclic action, at least in Himalayan yoga. And people know movement follows the breath. In the beginning, maybe the breath follows the movement, but in the end, movement follows the breath. Now, what happens when I do that? If I'm in some given position and I'm twisting and releasing, what do I do with my arms? Well, my biceps are pulling and my shoulders are floating toward the foot. And so when I lift up on that foot and I'm pulling, what gets longer? Side of the waist gets longer. I could have one hand on the heel of the foot, one hand on the thigh, and as I pull with one hand and push with the other hand, spine will get longer. But didn't I say the legs have to be active also? So if I pull with one hand and push with one hand, that's not the whole way. If I press my legs apart, then I start getting a release. So what's been forgotten in modern yoga, and it has been forgotten, that the legs have to be active in standing poses. They are not passive. You're not just standing there. And I'll show you how complex it gets, because it does get a little complex. And this will be a good introduction to you. Your teachers will take you a little farther into these kinds of things. Let's say I'm in a triangle pose. And as I'm in this triangle pose, I take, this is my left hip, I pull my left hip away from my left heel. Watch what my leg does when I pull my left hip away from my left heel. See, left hip pulls back. So what happened? My pelvis could bend a little bit, right? So the hip joint is opening. What happens to the quadricep? Quadricep became active. What if I do the same thing with the back leg, push to the back heel, foot turned in just a little bit, and I push to the back heel? Well, it actually tips my pelvis forward a little bit more. Instead of being short on the lower side, what would I do? Well, let's just say I put my hand on my foot or on the floor and I pulled a little bit. What would happen? The lower side gets longer. Now I turn my chest toward the ceiling. So as the chest turns toward the ceiling, now I can't go anymore. That's it. That's all I can turn the chest toward the ceiling. And guess what I would do next? If the chest is turning toward the ceiling, the pelvis tries to turn toward the floor. Now look at my spine. Look at the line of my body. When the chest turns toward the ceiling and the pelvis turns toward the floor, what happened? Everything got more narrow. So how am I going to get a twist in my spine to get a release in the fascia if one part, say chest is in one hand, pelvis in the other? I can't turn both of them in the same direction at the same time. And people try to do this all the time. You don't turn the pelvis and chest in the same direction at the same time. You turn the chest up as much as you possibly can. When you can't go up anymore, you turn the pelvis down. And what will it do? If you can do this at home, it'd be nice if I was there to check out how it's going. But if you would do this at home, you find it's challenging to breathe because transverse muscles of the abdomen and the obliques, internal, external obliques of the abdomen, squeeze in on the abdomen. So suddenly you're holding yourself up with true core strength. What is true core strength? True core strength is whatever makes the spine, the abdomen longer. So if I want to make the spine longer, what would I end up doing? I would turn the chest up toward the ceiling and the pelvis toward the floor. So I take one part, turn it one direction, take the other part, turn it in the other direction, right? So I'm getting a twisting action, and that twisting action, what happens if I get any kind of twisting action? Maybe I should do this sitting. If I'm sitting and I do some kind of twisting action, I lengthen my spine, I twist, I press my knees apart. That's a twisting action, right? Now I exhale, draw belly in toward the spine. So what am I getting? I'm getting a corseting action at the spine. Core strength is what makes the abdomen longer. If the abdomen's not getting longer, it's not core strength. Understand? Makes sense. So what happens? You have these guys, all these workers that are out there, and they're wearing all these things around their waist to protect their back. Sometimes they're just kind of there and they're not really tightening them down. But what happens if you tighten them down? If you tighten them down, if you have somebody in a corset, I've never put one on, but I'm sure I've seen some people with corsets on. And what happens? You tighten all these strings and so on. And what happens? The waist squeezes in and they get a little taller. It may be a little difficult to breathe too. But what happens if the waist gets skinnier? It gets longer. If I have a long balloon, long skinny balloon, and I grab the balloon in the middle really tight, what happens? The ends go up and down, right? It lengthens the whole balloon. This is a balloon, kind of. And so when I'm twisting into a given pose, pushing down to lengthen my spine, press the knees apart so I can go a little bit more deeply into this. Exhaling to draw belly in toward the spine. So let's go through all the instructions. Knees press apart. Arms lengthen the spine. I allow the shoulders to float up. Exhale, draw belly in toward the spine. And then I would inhale and come out. That's one way to work. If you had any concern about blood pressure problems, you always twist on an exhale, or you always express muscular strength on an exhale. Always the case. So as I'm twisting and releasing, why didn't everybody catch on to that? Because you go in the lowlands of India and they don't necessarily do that. Or it's lost in some places, not every place, but some places. How did it get lost? It got lost because the Himalayan master has a breath of 4 or 5 minutes, one breath every 4 or 5 minutes. So he goes into a pose. You can't tell he's moving. You can't tell. So they think they're holding the pose. Okay, my breath is like maybe one breath a minute. So if I go into a pose, you might see a little more. What do I do in my classes? I exaggerate it. I'll exhale, twist, inhale, release, so that people can perceive what is actually going on. What am I doing? I'm releasing the fascia. I'm twisting back and forth. Now, the interesting thing about fascia, and that gets somewhat into the energetics. The interesting thing about fascia is it's what is termed piezoelectric. That means if you put a stress on the fascia, it generates microcurrents. It generates currents in the tissue. In Chinese internal arts, which we'll talk about at some point, If I'm doing a standing meditation, and as I'm standing, I just kind of bend my knees and stand such and such a position with the knees bent for always best to eat first. And that way you won't digest your muscle enzyme. So they always, before standing meditation, you always eat. But if I stand like that for some period of time, what ends up happening? The thigh bone has pressure on it. If I stand straight up, the weight through my thighs is more or less equal to, for each thigh, half the weight of the upper body. That makes sense. So if a line is vertical, whatever weight is on top of that line, let's say the thigh bone, is distributed through the thigh bone. But if I put the angle like this, now the weight of the upper body is pushing down this way. And it turns out the amount of stress from this point to this point, see it's at an angle, is much greater than the weight. It's a mechanical problem. I can't prove it to you. You can figure it out, can't you? You can figure it out. What happens if I'm in down dog and have my arms straight down? You feel some work in your arms. But if I put you in a position where the arms and legs are going out, you will find that's a whole lot more weight running through the arms. So as soon as the leg gets at an angle, it's a much greater weight. Now, what does that do? It generates microcurrents. What do the microcurrents do? They burn the fat out of the bone marrow. So as you get older, the quality of the red blood cell you produce from the bone marrow is very symmetric. It can carry oxygen very well. And if you have yellow bone marrow, so a young person will have very red bone marrow. An older person that's not healthy will have yellow bone marrow. Why? There's fat in it. Fat builds up, comes from diet. It gets everywhere. So you have to burn the fat out. And one of the ways you burn the fat out is by putting stress on the bones. Bones are calcium phosphate crystals. And so when I put stress on the bone, you get currents running through. So what happens to an individual? I'll make it practical. What happens to an individual that has osteoporosis? So if I have an individual with osteoporosis, where do you get osteoporosis? You get it in the spine. You get it in the head of the femur, the neck of the femur. And you get it in the radius, the thumb side of the forearm. Why would you lose bone density on the thumb side of the forearm? I'll show you right now. Because people put their hands down like this. They'll let the knuckle of the index finger down. The knuckle of the index finger come up, and they rest on the pad of the small finger. Where do you want to place the hands? You want the hands to turn out a little bit, and you want the weight of the body to carry onto the ball or the knuckle of the index finger. And if you do that, then you won't lose bone density here. So the reason for loss of bone density in the forearm has to do with the way you use the arm. So what did the yogis do to take care of the problem? They said, do bhagasana. So if I'm in a position like that, knuckle of index finger firmly down, fingers turned out, then I will not lose bone density here. What do you do in the spine? If I shorten the front of my abdomen and stretch the back of my spine, reverse the lumbar curve. So as I'm sitting this way, the lumbar curve is supposed to be like this. It's this kind of curve. If my knees go up, what's the curve in my back do? It goes the other way. You understand? So when the knees are up and there's rounding in the lower back, where's the pressure taken? It's taken on the disc. I'm not going to go too much into it. I think there's a whiteboard I can use. Try it that way. Can I address Twisting Warrior? I will address Twisting Warrior in just a moment. Okay. So, all right, so there's a whiteboard. Can you see the whiteboard? And that is a head. And to let you know it's a head, I'm going to put a nose on it. Okay? Now I'm going to take a rib cage. That's one heck of a rib cage. And then I'm going to make a pelvis. Okay? Now you have lumbar spine. And you have cervical spine. Now, if you look at Gray's Anatomy, what will Gray's Anatomy tell you? Gray's Anatomy will tell you that a lumbar vertebrae is thicker in the front than in the back. You understand? So this is the front of the lumbar vertebrae. Now, what if I put a disc underneath? Oh, it's too fat. Oh my God. I gave the guy a herniated disc. So, where's my little drawing thing? Okay, there you go. So, ooh. Oh, okay, we start over. Okay. So I have lumbar vertebrae thicker in the front than it is in the back. And if I put a disc in uniformly, and I put another lumbar vertebrae, what do you notice? I get a curve. And so if I keep putting lumbar vertebrae in, thicker in the front than they are in the back, then that's how I have a lumbar curve. Okay? What happens if I stack one lumbar vertebrae This is reality. I've even done this in orthopedic surgeons' offices. Their comment was, we should publish this because it resolves certain long-standing problems. What if I have one vertebrae straight up and down? What is the disc going to do? If I'm not strong enough in the lower back, it'll bulge. And if it bulges, it will put pressure on the spinal nerves. Do you understand? That's how you get a herniated disc. How do you get a herniated disc? You bend over, you reverse your lumbar curve, and you pick up something heavy. That's how you herniate a disc. Okay? Just to understand. So, what would I do to put that disc back in? I would take the 2 lumbar vertebrae, put the person on their stomach. How do you know it's on their stomach? Because the thick part, which is in the front of the spine, is facing down. So that's the front. So if I have 2 lumbar vertebrae and I have a disc floating around in here, what will happen? Gravity will pull the disc back in place. Do you understand? So what happens? I'll tell you a story. Somebody brought in their brother-in-law to a class years ago, years and years ago. And he was not happy about coming to my teacher training class. But he came because he had a back problem. And here's the back problem. He could not put a sock on his right foot. He couldn't bend over and do it because it hurt his back. So his wife had to put his right sock on every morning. So he came in that condition. And so here's what I had him do. First of all, he didn't want to be there. So I can be respectful of that. So I figured I'd make his life easy. And this is what I did. I took actually a roll. I'm going to use 2 blocks. And I'm going to put them underneath my knee. Can you still see me in the little picture up there? No? Okay. Well, let me stop sharing that.
We can see you. We can see you, Robert.
Okay. I'll show like this and then I'll go back to the other part. But if I lie down on these blocks, where my quadriceps are on the blocks and I pull with my arms, what's going to happen? I'll stretch my abdomen. My rib cage is on the floor, but my hips are lifted. So what happens when I pull? The front of my abdomen lengthens and the back of my spine shortens a little bit. So where's the disc going to go? It's going to go toward the floor. How do you herniate a disc? The disc would push toward the spinal column. So it would be pushing up. Understand? Now, what if I do the following? I have one hand down. I'm pulling with my right arm, pushing down with my left arm. And as I twist, I'm just going to lift up my right leg. So what am I getting? I'm getting a stretch from the obliques, internal, external obliques. I'm getting a stretch here, but I'm getting an engaging of muscles in the lower back. So I'm accenting the curvature in the lumbar spine. So I put him in that position. And I knew if I just didn't say anything to him, he would fall asleep, which is exactly what happened. So I kept giving him a lecture, and I told him to lay there like this, hips lifted, abdomen long. I had him pull. I even checked to make sure the abdomen was long, and I let him fall asleep. So what happens when he falls asleep? The muscles in the front of his body let go, right? So when the muscles in the front of his body lets go, the disc wants to go from the back of the spine to the front of the spine. Does that make sense? So if I go back to this picture, he's lying on the ground, abdomen long, and so the gravity pulled this disc back into place. And I let him sleep for about 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, I said, lift your right leg, which is the leg that had a problem. Now, when I did it, when I first put him in, the right leg didn't go as high as the left leg. Why? Because the disc was bulging on the right side. So when he tried to lift up, it puts pressure on the nerve supply and it weakens the leg. So he couldn't lift the leg as high. Now the class saw it. I didn't say anything. I let them just watch. And they realized there was a problem on the right side. When he woke up, both legs were equally high. And you know what I said at that point? Sit on that chair and put your right sock on. And for the first time in 4 years, he could put his sock on. And I didn't even touch him. You understand? You need to keep the lumbar curve. You need to strengthen the lower back and lengthen the front of the abdomen. You can do crunches. That's okay to do that kind of stuff. But you have to make sure that the lower spine maintains its natural curvature. That's very important to do that. All right. I'm going to stop that part of it for a moment. And see if you have questions. I know there are some other things in here. When a disc herniates to, and then I guess we'll do the twisting warrior thing. So when a disc herniates to the side, what would you do? Understand, we want gravity to pull the disc back in place. So if I have someone where the disc is not pushing directly back, but pushing out to the side, what would I end up doing? I would lengthen the lower side, okay, and maybe lift up like this. Now it's a little more complicated. It could be that the disc is going out at about 45 degrees, in which case, instead of being flat like this, I turn them at about 45 degrees. That would be a workshop in itself to show you how to do all this for all the different problems, how to deal with scoliosis, and there's a variety of different problems. How do you deal with MS? There's different things you do for all this stuff. But the major thing, the major emphasis I did wanted to make for this particular class is you have to keep the lumbar curve. Now, I'll make the point a different way. If you're sitting in this particular position, you come to a Himalayan monk and the knees are up and the chest is collapsed, and they're going to put prana into your body, they won't do it. They want your spine straight. So if I'm rounding over like this because my knees are up and I put a block underneath my hips, then even if the knees are up, my back is going to be a little bit straighter. So the reason you put blocks underneath your hips is because if the knees are lower than the hips or the hips are higher than the knees, then the spine can be straight. So what happens if I'm in this particular position, the knees are up? I collapse my chest. What else will happen? We talked about it earlier. You'll overstretch the outer ankle. What else will happen? You'll start getting pain on the inside of the knee. What else will happen? You'll compress the discs by sitting like that. What else will happen? Well, there's a lot of stuff happening, right? Heart is this size, let's say. It's a big heart. And if the heart is pumping and I lean over and I collapse, I'm depressed, let's say, I will become more depressed. You know why? Because as soon as I lean forward, what happens to the size of the heart? It shrinks because the weight of the upper body is now on the heart. So now the heart can't relax completely. Do you understand? Does that make sense to you guys? If you have questions, you can always bring them up. I'm going to end up with more questions than I know how to answer, I think. Let's see what I got. All right. I'm going to continue going in this particular direction. So if my head goes forward, you can look at, there are books on the joints from someone called Kapanji. It's a 3-volume set on joints. And if you look under the lumbar spine, and I did the calculation myself to check it, and it's an accurate calculation. For every inch your head is forward of vertical, of being vertically over the lower spine, for every inch the head is forward, there's 10 more pounds of pressure on the disc. So you don't want to be sitting collapsed, because it puts pressure on the heart, it puts pressure on lungs, and it puts pressure on the discs of the lower spine. So longevity can become a problem. And I've known people, not particularly doing yoga, but I know people in their 20s with almost bone-to-bone contact from doing crunches, just doing a bunch of crunches. And I said, hey, I can stop the pain. And what did they say? I'll just do more crunches. So yeah, it's a hard sell, but crunches are not the answer to decompressing the lower spine. Okay, it's a different thing. How could you decompress the lower spine? Well, I could put my hands on my thighs and push, right? That would be one way to lengthen. I could put my hands here and push. I could also bend my knees. That would be one way to lengthen my spine. You can be in this position, turn from side to side, and you'll feel the decompression that occurs in the lower spine. So typically, when you're trying to decompress the spine, what are some of the actions that are required? And these are specific. I can prove this. If someone gave me enough money to do a study on it, I could prove it. Absolutely. There's no question about it. So it's really good science. So if I'm here and I put my hands on my thighs and then shift away to the heels and press the heels apart, you feel a release in your spine. So you can try it. You put your hands on your thighs, shift away to your heels and press the heels apart. And you feel the spine will tend to let go. It will tend to. So let me just give you some rules for forward bending. And then I'll go into this in a little bit of a different way. For release of the back of the leg, if I'm taking a leg up, for release in the back of the leg, the upper quadricep has to be stronger than the back of the leg. That makes sense. And if I take my hand away, the leg stays up, or if I lower the leg toward the floor and then lift it back up, you feel the quadricep. So unless I develop the quadricep, the back of the leg is not going to let go. You can do some hot yoga, you can fatigue the hamstring and so on. But in order for the back of the leg to let go, the quadricep has to become stronger than the hamstring when it's contracting. Now there's a process called there's a process called reciprocal inhibition. That means if I turn on the quadricep, it releases the back of the leg. Now there are different ways I could do that. So your first rule about forward bends is you always want the upper quadricep much stronger than the back of your leg, back of your thigh. If you can do that, then one type of forward bend will improve. What type of forward bend? A forward bend where the kneecap is pointing straight up. So there are two kinds of forward bends. There's forward bend where the knee is pointed to the side, and there's a forward bend with the knee pointing up. What's the forward bend with the knee pointing to the side? That's something like pigeon or putting your foot behind your head. So if I'm trying to put my foot behind my head, that's a forward bend with the knee up to the side. When the knee is pointing to the side, what has to be strong? Outer hip, outer thigh, outer lower leg have to be stronger than the inside. So for any forward bend where the knee is pointing to the side, the outer hip, the outer thigh, and the outer lower leg, we talked about the outer lower leg, have to be stronger than the inside. And then that forward bend will improve. So if I want to get into something like Baddha Konasana, it's a forward bend with the knees pointing to the side. So for that to occur, if I have strong enough muscles, outer hips and outer thighs and lower leg, then the legs will go down. If you're going to do something like Yogi Dandasana, what has to happen? If my foot is up, I have to be strong enough in the outer hip and outer thigh and outer lower leg so the knee can come down. And then once the foot is in that kind of position, then I can put my underarm in against the heel. So now that's Yogi Dandasana, right? That's that. Now, how could you get it? We could do it a different way. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I just want to give you the rough idea because this is just kind of defining the basic ideas you need for advanced anatomy. If I have my foot, my lower leg on two blocks, notice external malleolus, this little bony prominence here on the outer ankle, is not pressing on the block. Let me turn it sideways so you can see it a little bit more effectively. And I take my underarm and press the elbow toward the block, and now the heel is pushing into the shoulder. So when I come up, that's Yogi Dandasana, right? So I can begin to develop this way. I'm going to make a couple of other points, and then I'll go back and start answering questions. There are a few more points I want to make before it gets too late. What happens if I'm binding? When is it okay to bind? This is a really important point, and not many people will ever tell you this. If I put my knees on a block, because sometimes people try and bind, and what happens? There's a big space between the underarm and the leg. And if you try to bind that way, catching fingers or something like that, then you can injure the fascia in the shoulder. So what I recommend instead when people are learning to bind is that you put the leg on. You could do one block. You don't have to do two. If you can do two, so much the better. External malleolus, these two bony prominences on the outer ankle are not on the blocks. Just the shin itself is on the block. If I take my arm into that particular position, it looks hopeful to begin to bind. So if I can't do Yogi Dandasana, I probably have no reason to bind. But let's do it a different way. What if I'm sitting on the floor and I've got one knee resting on two blocks, and I just take my underarm and press it against the shin? So as I'm in this particular position, rib cage is resting down on the shin, elbow is down on the floor, And let me show you a little trick. If I can put my feet down and lift my hips off of the floor, then it's okay for me to bind that leg. Now look what happens when I bind. I mean, aside from the blocks coming apart a little bit. When I bind, my underarm, let me turn sideways so you can see it. My underarm is completely touching the shin. My shin is completely touching my rib cage. There is no space. And I can't hurt my shoulder if I do that. So if I were here and I was turning chest toward the ceiling and then back, that would be a good way to begin to loosen up the shoulder a little bit without overstretching the fascia. Let's do it one other way. If I take this leg back and I allow my underarm to completely rest on the shin, the arm goes in back and I catch the hands back there. As I'm in this position, what is the most important thing? That there is no daylight between the underarm and the shin, no daylight between the shin and the rib cage. If you're in this kind of position and you're binding, you're just going to hurt your shoulder. No point. You will not get benefit from that. So it becomes more important to open the hip joint before you bind. When the hip joint is completely open, that's what allows you to bind. It's opening in the hip joint that allows you to bind. It's not opening in the shoulder. You do not want to open the shoulder. So what happens when I do that particular pose? And I want to make this point because I know a lot of people like to bind. Okay? Not really of great value. So if I take my knee back, well, my knee can go that far back. What does it mean? It means my left hip, this hip, is very open, right? So if I take my arm and I bind the hands, notice one hand is catching the other, and then what am I going to do in this position? Squeeze the arms together. You'll see this in Ashtanga. Squeeze the arms together, straighten the arms to some degree, and then I kick the front foot forward and out to the side. So as I'm doing that, what am I doing? I'm turning on every muscle I can come up with in my shoulder, shoulder blade, and rib cage. And I challenge those muscles. So what happens? The deep muscles of the shoulder get strong. And that's what you want to have. You want the deep muscles of the shoulder to be really strong. So those are some ideas, at least, about binding. And I know I'm getting a little bit short on time, so I better answer some questions. So I'm going to do that. I like this little cursor on the screen. It's right there at my third eye. Okay, let's see what kind of questions we have. Why do you exhale to twist with low blood pressure? You exhale to twist with low blood pressure because if you inhale and hold the breath, the blood pressure goes up. So whenever you're expressing strength, blood pressure can go up. And if I do it with the breath held in, then the pressure will go up because I've filled myself with air and I'm activating the muscles. So it tends to increase blood pressure. Let me go through, make sure I haven't missed anything. What about cervical discs? Well, in cervical discs, the vertebrae in the cervical spine are pretty flat. So you're less likely to get herniation in that area. There are a variety of different problems that can come from problems with cervical spine. But unless there's some sort of accident or you lie in the wrong way. Let's say you're sleeping at night and you got pillows that are way too high What happens if I stretch here? My head is in this position. What happens if I do this? Then I could stretch out the lower side of my neck, and then gravity would pull the disc to that side. So I wake up in the morning and I have a hard time turning my head to the side where the disc is herniating. How do you put it in? You do a handstand with your fingertips on the wall and you turn your head from side to side. That's how you would basically put it back in. And I've had people with what they call crick in their neck, where they can't turn their head to one side. And it doesn't always work, but if it's something that you did while you were sleeping, what can you do? Well, you can put your hands on a wall. And here's how I put hands on a wall. I'll take the index finger and middle finger and touch the wall, and then I'll pull the middle finger off like half an inch or an inch. And I put my hands like that and go into a handstand that way. And the reason I do that is because when I externally rotate the shoulders, it takes some pressure off of the neck. What's the weakest part of the shoulder? Back of the shoulder. What's the strongest part of the shoulder? The front of the shoulder. What rotates the arm in? There's a lot of muscles, but pectorals rotate the arms in. Latissimus dorsi rotates the arms in. So when I'm looking at my underarm, the muscle on this side is pectoral. The muscle on that side is latissimus dorsi. They're both internal rotators. So these are big, strong muscles. And if I don't develop external rotation in the shoulder, then I'll get compression in the front of the shoulder. So how do people end up injuring their shoulders doing something like Ashtanga? They turn their hands in, or they do middle fingers parallel. If you're going to do that kind of thing, take your hands wider than your shoulders. Make sure that your hands are wider than your elbows, and that your elbows are not winging out to the side. So when the hands turn in or start to turn in and the elbows go out, you'll get compression in the front of the shoulder. So typically in hand placement, if you had to do hand placement, I recommend that the hands turn out. One of the reasons I recommend that the hands turn out, there are three major types of injuries that can occur in the wrist. And when you turn the hand out, at least two of them will not occur. One of the things that can occur is you can get compression right in the center of the wrist in the back. Now, why would that occur? Why would I get compression here? That would mean this side of my wrist is too weak. And so when I put my hands down and I try to jump back in a vinyasa, something like that, then I'd get compression here. But if you turn your hand out, it's less likely. What is the key thing that has to occur? You have to strengthen from the fingers into the forearm. So if I hold with my hand like this, or hold with middle fingers, middle finger, index, or ring finger, or ring finger and little finger, then what will I strengthen? I'll strengthen this area. So what are these muscles used for? Well, to close the hand. But what prevents compression here? To avoid compression here in the back of the wrist, this has to be strong. So if I take my hand and, I don't know if this shows very well, I squeeze the pads of the palm in. So this pad, little finger pad, thumb pad, are very strong. And I hook my hand around my foot or shin. Let's do shin. So if I take the crease of my wrist, hook my hand around my shin, and pull, what gets strong? All of this gets strong. Now, there are other ways to do it, which are not quite so easy, but I could show that really quickly. So often when I teach forward bending, what I have people do, I'll say, bend your knee. You don't have to have the block. I'm putting the block there just because maybe makes it a little bit more evident what I'm doing. maybe, maybe. If I put the heel of my palm under the heel of the foot and I'm not using my fingers and I push with my leg, what's going to get strong? The muscles that pull the hand in. So if you take your foot, hook your hand over the heel, and you push through the heel, what will happen? This will get strong. This area will get strong. When this is very strong, what happens when I put my hand down? It will not compress here because this is so strong. So another way to look at it, let me do that. If I have my hands down and I just try to lift the heel of the palm away from the floor or lift the fingertips away from the floor, I have to have great strength here. So that's another way that you could work. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because I'd really like to get to all the questions. Okay, there's no problem with holding poses for long periods of time as long as the alignment is good. What is alignment? Alignment is uniform pressure over the joint. So regardless of what position you're in, if you have any kind of bone discomfort in that particular position, it is not a good idea. You do not want pain in the bones when you're holding a pose. So you can hold the pose for any period of time you want, but you need to be comfortable. You don't do it and just survive or kind of gut it out. Not a good idea. So that's the only thing I would say about that. When you hold poses for a long period of time, there shouldn't be pain in the bone, or really any pose. Doesn't do any good. Talk about exhale. Cervical spine and head forward. When the head is forward of the spine, again, for every inch, there's 10 more pounds on the disc. So if I'm looking at a cell phone and my head is, center of my head is 6 inches forward of where it might be otherwise, then there's basically 60 pounds on the discs. How to keep the lumbar spine healthy. For the lumbar spine to be healthy, you have to press the knees apart so glute medius turns on. So if I'm here and I just press my knees apart, immediately the front line tends to open because psoas lets go. I'll show you a different way because that may not be obvious what I'm doing. If I put a block underneath my back, so my rib cage is resting there. And as I'm in this position, I press my knees apart. Look what happens. See my spine? I'm going to push my knees apart. As soon as I do that, my hips are still on the ground, but what happens? Psoas lets go. So when the knees press out to the side, when there's lateral pressure on the legs, then psoas lets go as a result of doing that kind of thing. Pressing the knees apart won't necessarily strengthen the outer thighs. You can do it with some kind of opposition. So what might you do? Well, one of the things that you might do is if I'm lying on blocks, I'll show you the basic idea. So if I'm lying on blocks, I have 2 blocks end to end. And as I'm lying in this position, you see where my knees are. If my knees press apart, they lower. if I take this out a different direction, if I take my left knee onto the floor and I press my knees apart, I can get a little more length in the abdomen, and there's more bend in my hip. How do I know there's more bend in the hip? If my knees press apart, then my knees get closer to the front plane of my chest. See that? So the hip bent. If I press the left knee toward the floor, the left quadricep turned on, and the knee dropped a little more. So what would be the actions that you would use to open the hip joint? Knees press apart, outer hip, outer thigh, perhaps outer lower leg, and the upper quadriceps turn on. So I press my knees apart, and I press one knee into the floor and turn away from whichever knee is down. So if I twist away from whichever knee is down, knees press toward the floor, pelvis turns away from whichever leg is down. And you feel the glute, outer glute turn on, outer thigh turn on, quadricep turn on. So for the two types of forward bends, either a forward bend with the knee pointing up, I guess I didn't show you that. We did a forward bend with the knees pointing to the side. That was like doing something like pigeon pose or foot behind the head. But what happens if the legs are out to the sides? I guess I'll do it that way. My knees are pointing up, so this is a different kind of forward bend. Say again?
Your screen is frozen.
Yeah.
Not frozen on my end. Let's see if we can refresh it some kind of way. Internet looks good over here.
My computer
But
says
I'm
that
kind of
your
wired in.
net bandwidth is low.
Yeah, not showing on this side.
We can hear you, Robert, just the screen is frozen, but the sound is good.
Probably. All right. Well, maybe what I do is continue. Answer questions. What can I do?
Try to stop the video for one moment and then turn it back on. And sometimes that will refresh the feed.
That help any? Stop the video.
I was also going to
And
say,
start up again.
Robert, sometimes, Robert, when I was taking the Tuesday night classes with you, it would do the same thing, but it would come back. So I would just say, keep on going.
Okay. Let's see here. Baker's cyst behind the knee is not necessarily so quiet because they have a tendency to be pretty much continuous. You can't just get rid of them. Sometimes they can remove them and it will stop, but there's no easy answer for Baker's cyst. I wish there was. If you're not able to bind, what's the best way to strengthen the deep muscles of the shoulder? Well, one of the ways that you can do that is you lie with your head on a block and you lift and lower a weight. I don't know if you can see this. You lift and lower like so. Can anybody see me? Am I there?
Yes, we can see you.
Or you see me? Okay. So if my shoulder blade is roughly parallel to the floor and I lift and lower, that'll strengthen the external rotators of the shoulder, and that'll be useful. It'll certainly go in the right direction. It may not be everything. Some of these are a little complex. Handstand with the head hanging and turning the head side to side is a good way to reestablish proper alignment in cervical spine. Hyperextension in a joint would mean, in the case of the elbow, maybe there's pain in the back of the elbow. In the case of the knee, you might have compression in the front of the knee, the lower portion of the knee. Depending on what the problem a person is having, we might take different approaches. But yes, you can correct it. It may not be easy. It can take a great deal of strength, particularly if you're dealing with lower legs. Now, ballerinas will often get, I don't know if it's often get, but they can get a tear in the cruciate ligament. So you have anterior cruciate ligament, posterior cruciate ligament. And if you overstretch on the inside of the knee, then typically in a jump, if they haven't gotten enough strength in the back of their knee, then they can tear the anterior cruciate ligament, then the knee will come apart that way. So in order to protect that, it's not just strength in the quadricep, it's strength in the back of the knee. And typically in the back of the knee, you have what is known as popliteus, which runs across the back of the knee. And that has to be strong to avoid ACL tears when the back of the knee is open. Okay, so I have two things. Patellar tendonitis. So you have inflammation under the kneecap. What does that mean? When you have inflammation underneath the kneecap, then it typically means that the hip flexors are way too strong relative to the back of the knee. So what has to develop is you have to develop strength in the back of the knee. If you press on the back of the knee and you find a very sensitive area or an area that tends to bulge, then that might be one way to get the knee to release. For a lateral meniscus, why do you get a tear in the lateral meniscus? Well, typically a tear in the lateral meniscus will come because you're standing and you pivot on the foot, not the heel, but over the whole foot, you try to pivot. And when there's a turn of the shin in one direction and the femur in the opposite direction, you can tear the lateral meniscus. The lateral meniscus can regenerate. And if you look at reviews of medical physiology, and I've done it. I've gotten a tear. I had a dance company in an old studio that I had, and so I was waiting for my class, and I was standing there, and someone tripped over a nail or something, and they were about ready to hit the wall with their face. And I reached out and grabbed them. And when I did, it twisted my knee and I tore my lateral meniscus. It took about 8 months to regenerate it. You can regenerate. Medial meniscus, much more difficult. The major thing when you have a meniscus tear is don't look for the pain. Try to do everything possible for 8 to maybe 15 months where there's no pain, and it will tend to regenerate if you have a reasonable diet. How do we start yoga with a beginner student who can't sit on the floor due to tight hips, hamstrings, so on. Okay, you start them off with blocks underneath their hips. And then how would I work? I would work, let me make this really specific. If their knees are up, what would I do? I would put one knee down. If the knee still won't go down, I put a block underneath the knee. And then what do? Press the knees apart, turn the pelvis away from whichever knee is down. And when you turn, you feel the hip of that leg turn on. And so if I do that enough, and then instead of using a block, use junk mail. Just take a bunch of junk mail, put it underneath your knee. And then once a week, pull one piece out. So eventually that knee will be completely down. So as I increase the strength on the outer hip and thigh, the knee will come down. The adductors will eventually let go. But the adductors will not let go if you just try to put your feet together and push your knees toward the floor. You'll tend to create compression on the inner knee, and you'll tend to tighten the inner thigh. Okay? This idea that you can lie down in Shavasana with your feet together and that the knees will go down, it may, depending on the anatomy, but it may not, depending on the anatomy, because the length of the neck of the femur in some individuals will not allow the knees to go down without potentially having soft tissue injuries in the hip joint, so like labral tear, something like that. I'm trying to go through these things to get as much of this as possible. Okay, what do you do for rounding in the upper back, head shifted forward? Let me do that one. That's really important. If again, I take 2 blocks end to end, I'm going to do that right now. If again, I have 2 blocks end to end underneath my pelvis, and I want the pelvis lifted. This is 4 inches high. If I take my arms straight up and I lift my upper back, that may be uncomfortable in the neck because the muscles have to work. So fingers go up toward the ceiling, the head stays down, upper back lifts up. I come down, turn my head to the right, and I lift and lower. I turn my head to the left, lift and lower. Come back to center, lift and lower. And that will tend to take pressure, to take excessive curvature out of the upper back. It's very effective. You do it twice a day, maybe in the morning when you wake up and again in the evening before you go to sleep. And that's pretty effective. How to keep the back of the knee strong. Triangle can do it if you have your knee active. So, but let me see if I can give you something a little more. If I'm sitting and I try to pull my heel toward my outer hip, so you can see where that is. The heel is more or less sitting in line with the sit bone. And if I try to pull the heel toward the outer hip, that direction, that turns on popliteus. So I could have my heel, I don't know if the other foot is necessarily the right way to pull, but you pull in toward the hip and toward the outer hip. In toward the sit bone and toward the outer hip. And that will tend to strengthen the back of the knee. But in general, you don't want to avoid strengthening the back of the knee. Now, there's a couple of muscles that strengthen the back of the knee. If gastrocnemius is strong enough, then it'll be pretty firm behind the knee. But what you really want to develop is popliteus, and popliteus would be, I drag the heel toward the outer hip. And beyond that, there's not a whole lot else. You can do standing meditation, and the knee will stay bent for, say you do it for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. then you'll find the fascia in the back of the knee will begin to shorten. So over a period of a few days, you'll find the back of the knee will get a little bit stronger. Okay, if there's, what's the problem with carpal tunnel? Problem always with carpal tunnel is the heel of the palm flattens. The one thing that you don't want to do is take the curvature out of your lumbar spine. You can do it with your cervical spine, but I really don't recommend it. Or flatten the curves of the palm. You don't want to flatten the curves of the palm. To avoid carpal tunnel, what has to be strong? The muscles that squeeze the pads of the palm together. Now notice, I'm not squeezing the fingers. I'm just squeezing the pads. So if I have my hand, let me do it like this. I press the knuckle of the index and middle finger firmly against the knee, rotate the arm in, squeeze the pads of the palm, and sink the elbow toward the floor. So let me do it this way so you can see. Knuckle of index and middle finger pushing against the knee, rotate the arm in, squeeze the pads of the palm in, so I can get contractions near pain in this area. And that's one way to keep pressure off the carpal tunnel. You'll notice if I just take a free hand, push on the knuckle and index finger, knuckle of the index and middle finger, push, sink the elbow, rotate the arm in, and squeeze the pads of the palm. So I'm squeezing and releasing. This is not showing really well. So as I pinch here and I get this strong, this line strong, I won't have carpal tunnel. What's another way you can work? And I wish I had another person here because it's difficult to do it on yourself. If I had one hand and I was pulling on a person's hand, maybe they have their arm like so, and then I take my fingers and squeeze the bones of their forearm together. So I want to take these two bones in the forearm and squeeze them together. When I squeeze these two bones together and the person is hooking their hand and squeezing pads of the palm, it'll take pressure off the carpal tunnel. So what happens? If you're always standing on the heel of your palm, that does happen. That people will put their hand down and the heel of the palm is pushing straight down into the floor. And what will happen when the hand is pushing straight down into the floor? It collapses the carpal tunnel. The carpal tunnel is a little tunnel of bones, right? It's like a little igloo. And if the igloo is built on a fault line and the fault line opens, then the igloo collapses. Same thing is true with the hand. If the bones of the forearm separate, in other words, I don't have great strength in the muscles that wrap around the forearm, if those are not straight, and how do I get those strong? Well, I can twist and release. So I could take a little weight and twist and release. That might give you some strength here. But you can also squeeze these two bones together if you get somebody that's strong enough. You can begin to help the hands. Hands will have fewer problems if you hang the feet on the hands. So I'm holding on with a pair of fingers, index and middle finger in this case, and then middle finger, ring finger, and then ring finger, little finger. And while I'm in that position, let's see, while I'm in that position, I'm taking my fingers through pretty strongly, and I can shift a little bit from side to side. So you find there's more pull in the fingers when you do that. Then I might do middle finger, and ring finger, little finger. Now, if you can easily hold on by wrapping the whole finger around and you want a little bit more of a challenge, you can take just the fingertips and hold on that way. And that'll be a little bit more challenging, but heck, you know, by that stage you could go rock climbing and that'll do the same thing if you use little tiny holes. Why do you want fingers so strong? Because when the fingers are strong, it tends to clear energy from the center of the heart. We'll talk about that in energetics. So the stronger the arms are, the more the heart is open. Heart is very open when the fingers are very strong. Hands are very strong, arms are very strong. Because the energy coming into that area is coming from this space. It's actually coming from two places. It's coming from throat chakra and it's coming from heart chakra. Those are the two places that tend to be developed that way. So what would you do as far as meditative practice? Well, the first thing you have to do is you've got to clear the emotion, and maybe this is more for the next session, but I'll do a little bit. So if I exhale out of the mouth and I let the air crossing my lips move out very slowly, so I only feel the warmth of the air crossing lips. And so if I'm here, as I'm inhale comfortably and then exhale very slowly, where you just feel the warmth of the air crossing the lips, you can begin to move some of the prana from the heart space out. You can also just do lots of work with the arms. That'll work. I didn't show it, but if I'm in a given position, let me make sure my mat's in a good place. If I'm in a given position and I try and put my eyes on that block with my hands down, I'm going to try and put my eyes on the block. And when I do that, by trying to put my eyes on the block, my elbows come over my hands. And that's how you jump back. That's how you learn how to jump back. But if you don't have enough strength with your hands in this position, if serratus anterior is not strong enough, if you're carrying too much grief, too much sadness, and you can't clear it out, or you're very susceptible to that kind of grief and sadness, you have other people that you're trying to help that have that, then you will find it will interfere with some of the strength in your arms. So there's a certain amount of fearlessness that has to develop. And how does the fearlessness come? The Himalayan masters will say, we are fearless because we trust. So regardless of the circumstance, they always trust, and they're very patient. So one of the stories is Swami Vidyadeshananda. They're huge snakes in Himalayas. And sometimes they work in pairs to capture something. So they're very smart too. And he came out of samadhi at one point, And he said there was a big snake warming itself on my spine, and it was wrapped around the top of my head. And he said, it's a really big snake. And so if you move, it'll wrap around you, and that wouldn't be good. So he says, sometimes I have to stay, meaning it happens more than once, that I have to stay sometimes for 5 hours in that position before the snake will leave. So they're very patient and very trusting, exceptional individuals. Now, where would you put, and we'll talk about these kinds of things. I mean, the energetics become really important. And, I could, do the whole thing just on the structure, but, I think it's important to look at the energetics. So what is this position? This position is Siddhasana. So when I fold one foot in, heel pointing up, and then I take the next foot, put it over the top so the heel is lifted, right? Okay. And why do I place the feet with the heels pointing up? Because then I don't overstretch the outer ankle and I won't compress my inner knee. So the reason, if there is a posture that I would recommend for people who are doing advanced practices and you're going to sit in meditation for a while, Siddhasana is a really good choice. You can do it in such a way, and it doesn't have to be done this way. You could elevate the hips a little bit, especially if you're going to stay for a long period of time. I could take the bottom foot and let the heel push up toward the perineum, and then the top foot crosses over the top of that. So as I'm in this position, keeping breathing very deep, I'm in this position. What does it mean? This is the template that defines how you work every joint in a yoga pose. So what do you want? You want the spine very straight. Where do you want the knees? You want the knees pressing out. How do the knees press out? Well, lateral hips and thighs. How do the knees push back? Quadriceps. So if the legs are in this position with the knees wide apart and the knees as far back as possible, the only way you can get there is outer hips and thigh stronger than the inside, and upper quadriceps stronger than the back of the thigh. With the feet, you want the heels turned up. With the spine, you want the spine straight. With the arms, you want the hands forward of the chest and the arms rotating out. So this basically defines what you're going toward as you're practicing yoga. So whatever your practice is, if this pose isn't getting better, depending on how it's not getting better or how it's getting worse, it'll tell you what you're missing in your postures, what's going wrong. Now, when you're in a position, I lift an arm overhead, what do you do with the shoulder? Shoulder blade down, shoulder blade forward, chest lifted, arm rotates out, and I turn my head away from the lifted arm. So when I'm lifting an arm, that's what I'm doing. Shoulder blade down, shoulder blade, bottom of the shoulder blade forward, chest lifted, arm rotates out, and I turn the head away from the lifted arm. And that'll minimize compression in the neck. Let me see what other questions I've got before I get too far along. And let's see. Okay, knee swelling is not something that'll easily go away. You can elevate, that'll do some of it, but as long as there's inflammation in the knee, the swelling won't go away. The swelling is some compromise in the fascia that allows the fluid to build up in that area. So you'd have to take time so that the fascia grows back, and depending on where it is in the knee, you might be able to take care of things. Often, people don't like this answer. You got to rest. Okay, in one position, okay, you got to tell me which position. In that position, I'm not sure which is that position. One leg rotates out more than the other. How can you equalize them? Well, typically, if you're doing Siddhasana, I'm supposing you're talking about Siddhasana, then you have to change which leg is on top. So if you keep the same leg on top, then you might start getting some problems in sacroiliac joint or the outer hip and thigh. You're not, okay. When you're clearing grief, you can do arm work, and that will move some of the energy into the arms and might have a tendency to clear. But typically what you'll use, and I'm definitely going to go in the next class, typically you use something called Purvatasana, which is Himalayan technique to take built up stress in the system and clear it out. And the way it's done, I'm just going to go through it just briefly. You would inhale and take the arms overhead, interlock the fingers, hands pressing up. Now, if you feel this in the front of your shoulder, inside of the shoulder here, then I would reach through the elbows. I wouldn't push through the hands. You don't want it to inflame the front of the shoulder. So I'll go through this fairly quickly. I'd inhale, take the arms up, and hold the breath. I'd exhale and hold the breath out. Inhale, hold the breath. Exhale, lean to the other side. Hold the breath. Inhale back to the center. Exhale, twist to one side. Inhale back to the center. Exhale, twist to the other side. Inhale back to the center. Exhale, lean forward. Inhale back to center, turning the head up. And exhale, lowering the arms. So it's inhale, hold the breath. Exhale, hold the breath. You're always inhaling back to center. And whenever you exhale, it's going to be leaning to one side, leaning to the other side, twisting to one side, twisting to the other side, leaning forward, leaning back. That doesn't sound like much, but mastery is 18-second inhale, 18-second breath retention, 18-second exhale, 18-second holding the breath out. Now, that may be unrealistic in the beginning. So what do? Inhale for 5 seconds, hold for 5 seconds, exhale 5 seconds, hold out for 5 seconds. Now, when you do it, if you're prone to panic attacks or anxiety, that will start to come up. You'll feel those emotions come up because it's clearing it. If you can emotionally, psychologically deal with it, then you repeat 3 times, 3 sets of all of that. lean, lean, twist, twist, forward, back. That's it. That's one round. So you can do it up to 3 rounds. You may feel heat coming out of the body. That is the stress coming off of the body. So when you're first starting, if you're prone to panic attacks, you will go in a direction as if you're going to get a panic attack. And the idea is you can relax at a given point, but be consistent. Return, revisit it all, go through it again. It'll begin to remove some of the stress. After a given period of time, you'll find there'll be less and less heat being released. And eventually, you can do it for a much longer period of time. Inhale retention, exhale retention can become quite long. But then by that point, you may not need to do it too much. If you're having regular stress, then I do at least 1 round every day. That's sort of a maintenance. That's pretty useful as far as getting built up stress. Now, you know, I'm not trying to be a psychologist here. I'm just giving you some things. Okay, thanks, Paula, for mentioning Parvatasan. If everything is temporary, why do we speak of escape from the karmic cycle? Would an escape not be permanent and thus not an option? Is this escape just temporary like everything else? No, it's not. The idea of enlightenment is that, in fact, you can escape or transcend. But let's be a little clear about it, and I'll bring something up. There's a great Himalayan monk by the name of Tadwala Baba, and he lived in the Himalayas for a long time. At about age 35, he stopped aging. You can look on YouTube. You'll see videos of Tadwala Baba, and he looks like he's 35, and he's actually, you know, in his 80s. At a certain point, people stop looking for distractions from whatever they might be suffering. That tends to occur. That individuals will stop looking for distractions from pain. And you start finding that there's more acceptance of your circumstance, and you can be patient with it to some degree at least. But what you're looking for is inside of you. So what does that mean? If what you're looking for is inside of you, then that means it's always present. That means wherever you are in space or time, it's available. And in fact, it is true. So you don't have to go anywhere to become enlightened. But if you just follow the activities of the mind, then as you follow the activities of the mind, it will guide you in different directions. Now, sometimes people will say some movie that they looked at was disturbing, frightening, something like that. And yet it's not reality. But the mind can relate to it in a certain way. And so fear comes up as a result. even if the fear is not reality, you take it as reality. So to begin to escape from what might be termed the karmic cycle, you get to a point, you can read Bhagavad Gita about this, you get to a point where whatever thought occurs, you know it may not be reality. That the mind is changeable. So you have individuals that can become contented with whatever circumstance they're in. And at a certain point, the mind becomes quiet enough that you see beyond what you think or what you thought that you know. And one of the experiences that I had long time ago, well, maybe not that long, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I was sitting in a very cold, dark place. I had been away from home for a long time. I was tired, it was cold, it was early morning. I was doing my practices, and I was overcome by a profound sense of loneliness. Just almost unbearable because it was so intense. And if you haven't felt it, you wouldn't know, but I certainly knew in that moment. And what happened? Usually when that kind of thing occurs, you just focus on the only thing you can focus on. You don't necessarily try and change anything. And when I did focus there, then I merged into probably the most beautiful place I've ever been. And there was no loneliness. This beautiful, loving place. And I did nothing to get there. It was there. And because I focused so intently on the only thing there was to focus upon without rejecting it, I merged into that place. And that's how much I can tell you about it. When you're feeling great love for another person, then time can pass by very quickly because you don't want to be anyplace else. That's where you are is fine, right? When someone passes away, my mother passed away many years ago, many years ago. And when that occurred, there was feeling of grief. But then I noticed that I had certain characteristics, the best characteristics I had, if you will, gained from her. And as soon as I realized that was inside of me, and it was a matter of a few seconds to get there, then there was no longer grief. Because I was carrying something inside of me that was priceless, that I picked up from her. That was fine. One of the ways we can complete this is to look at a meditation on mindfulness breathing with space. It's part of the Hansa Vedas. Free content. And I'll put the whole thing down. It's It's under free content, under mindfulness on the Hansa Vedas website. And I usually tell people to start around 21 minutes into it. And I'll take you through a little piece of it, just so you get a little bit of a sense. And you can explore it. That's part of your homework, so you can explore it. A few other elements that are part of homework, which are just mostly videos that you can go through and take some notes on, get a perspective. The thumb is neutral. The index and middle fingers have alternating charges depending on time of day, but held together, they're neutral. Same thing with ring finger and little finger. So if I take all of my fingers, cluster them around my thumb, and place the fingers near midpoint between eyebrows, right where the curve of the eyebrows would intersect above the bridge of the nose. And then you might exhale and relax your arm. Now you can still feel where your fingers were touching your forehead. As you exhale, midpoint between eyebrows is Ajna chakra. It comes from a bony prominence at the back of the skull and expresses through midpoint between eyebrows. So you would exhale, total focus midpoint between eyebrows. Pause the breath. Inhaling, withdrawing some of your attention from midpoint between eyebrows and in a surface about the size of your palm or hand, you feel the back of the skull and pause the breath. So exhale, total focus midpoint between eyebrows, pause the breath. Inhaling, withdrawing attention from the midpoint partially to the back of the skull and pause. And if you continue that, exhale, pause, and inhale, pause. Then you might begin to feel a little bit of a buildup of charge. The prana will start to build up globally over the back of the skull. Now that's one element of it. We'll go through this again. As you inhale, the abdomen is distending. You're not expanding the chest. You're inhaling, distend the lower abdomen. The center of that expansion in the lower abdomen is 5 fingers below the belly button. So where the little finger is on the lower abdomen, that's the center of the expansion. Inhale and pause. Exhale. Draw the belly in toward the spine and pause. So when I'm focused at midpoint between eyebrows, I exhale and pause. Not focusing with the eyes, focusing the consciousness there. Eyes are relaxed. As you inhale, you're using very quiet Ujjayi breathing. In all Himalayan yoga, all pranayama is done with ujjayi. You're not trying to be loud, especially when your breathing slows down tremendously. If you're breathing 1 or 2 breaths a minute, there's no sound. You feel the vibration in the throat. That's it. It's very, very subtle. So if I exhale, total focus midpoint between eyebrows, pause the breath. Inhaling, withdrawing some of your attention from midpoint to the back of the skull. Exhale, pause, and inhale, pause. Now there are a few other phases to this particular breathing. Eventually, you continue, exhale, total focus midpoint between eyebrows, inhale, feel the top of the skull. And eventually you end up in the heart space. And as you're focused on the heart space, I'm just going to review it a little bit. We'll go through it and do it next time. When you inhale, you imagine the heart is expanding. Center of the heart, core of the heart, sky of the heart is expanding. So the energy in your heart space is expanding to top of the head, arms, and legs. And as you exhale, all the attention comes back into the heart space. And as you do it for longer and longer periods of time, it's an hour meditation, but you develop that hour meditation over 6 years. So you start off, you can do the very beginning of it, explore a little bit, see the different elements that are there. And then you add 5 more minutes every 6 months. So if you add 10 minutes a year, in 6 years you have an hour meditation. Is it helpful? Even if you don't do the whole thing, you will find it's very quieting to do this. And the other thing that you can practice is taking attention into the heart space. Now to come out of it, exhale, total focus midpoint between eyebrows. Inhaling, withdrawing attention to the back of the skull. Exhale, pause, inhale, pause. And then just be aware of the arms and legs, hands and feet. Eyes are closed. Allow the chin to come toward the chest. Feeling arms and legs, hands and feet. And then softly opening the eyes, slightly opening the eyes to see the arms and legs, hands and feet. And then you can begin to stretch around however you like. Now, if you want to explore a little more, it doesn't have to be in order. Take a little section, a 5-minute section, explore a little bit, see what it feels like. Start to develop just a little bit of disciplined focus. And after a while, the beauty of the meditation, the quality of what you get will capture you. And then it becomes effortless to continue. With much of yoga, it's like that. I remember decades ago, talking to Judith Lassiter, she said, yeah, some mornings I get up and I really don't want to do yoga. But I made a pact with myself that if I do 3 poses and I don't feel better, then I don't have to do yoga that day. And she said, I've never missed a day. So sometimes you just make a little bit of effort. It's okay. So there's our little introduction for advanced anatomy. We could probably spend an entire weekend just talking about these things, showing you this stuff is life. It's very involved. But you get the basic idea. You move with the breath. You have cyclic patterns. You're not holding anything. Or you can hold it, but if I'm exhaling and I'm taking a really long time to exhale, well, it might look like you're holding it. Or you can also get to the very edge. Like let's say I'm very deep in a twist. And I might exhale, go a little bit forward, and then inhale. Come slightly out. And exhale in very, very tiny movements. But it could also be a big movement. Kind of up to you. So play with it. You've got some time to figure that out.